Imagine if we could empty the oceans, letting the water drain away to reveal the secrets of the seafloor. Now we can, using the latest underwater scanning technology, piercing the deep oceans and turning accurate data into three-dimensional images. We can finally see what lies beneath. Hidden in the darkness, entombed in crushing pressure and freezing cold, rest the remnants of Hitler's most terrifying weapons. These are not merely wrecks. They are time capsules of ambition, desperation, and technological daring. They are monuments to a regime that reached across continents and oceans, leaving behind a trail of innovation and horror. And they are graveyards, holding the stories of thousands who never returned home. Hitler's ambition was global. His war machine extended from the frozen fjords of Norway to the sun-baked waters of the Indian Ocean, from the gray chop of the Baltic to the treacherous currents of the English Channel. As we drain away the waters that have concealed these secrets for more than 7 decades, we uncover not just metal and machinery, but the hidden history of the Second World War itself. Our journey begins in Norway, in a place where the very water itself became a battlefield. Lake Tinn is a body of water so deep and cold that it seems almost designed to keep secrets. Surrounded by mountains that climb 1,000 meters into the Nordic sky, the lake plunges down into darkness, reaching depths of 460 meters. That's 1,500 feet of black, frigid water. For decades, something has rested at the bottom of this lake. Something that once represented Hitler's most terrifying dream, the atomic bomb. During World War II, Nazi scientists entered a race that would determine the fate of civilization itself. They sought to harness atomic power to create a weapon so devastating that it could level entire cities in the blink of an eye. Hitler's vision was clear. He wanted a bomb that could obliterate London, turn the tide of war instantly, and secure German dominance for 1,000 years. But to build such a weapon, the Nazis needed a crucial ingredient, something rare and precious: heavy water. Heavy water is chemically similar to ordinary water, but the hydrogen atoms are twice as heavy as normal. This seemingly minor difference made it vital for the Nazi nuclear program. Heavy water could moderate a nuclear reactor, slowing down neutrons just enough to sustain a chain reaction. And in 1940, there was only one place in the world producing heavy water in industrial quantities: the Vemork power plant near Lake Tinn. Vemork was once the world's largest hydroelectric power station, a testament to Norwegian engineering. Its massive turbines generated the enormous amounts of electricity needed to produce heavy water through a complex process of electrolysis. The plant sat on the edge of a cliff, an imposing fortress of concrete and steel. On April 9, 1940, Germany invaded Norway, and one of their first objectives was to seize control of Vemork. The Nazis were eager to secure the heavy water, understanding that whoever controlled this resource might control the future of warfare itself. By 1942, at the peak of production, Vemork was generating as much as 1,000 kilograms of heavy water per month. Over a ton was a significant step toward building Hitler's first nuclear reactor and potentially his first atomic bomb. The implications were terrifying. If Germany succeeded in developing nuclear weapons before the Allies, the war could be lost. Churchill understood the stakes perfectly. He wanted the heavy water plant destroyed, and he wanted it done immediately. Allied air raids targeted Vemork repeatedly, but the plant's location made it extremely difficult to hit. The Nazis, recognizing the vulnerability, eventually decided to move their precious stockpile. On February 20th, 1944, they planned to transport almost a year's output of heavy water by train from Vemork. The journey would take the cargo across Lake Tinn by ferry, then onward by rail to Germany and the site of a nuclear reactor. It was a carefully planned operation, with soldiers loading around 40 barrels onto railway carriages. Each barrel contained the liquid that could change the course of history. The hydro ferry departed on schedule, carrying its deadly cargo and dozens of civilian passengers who had no idea what they were traveling with. But the ferry never reached its destination. At 10:45 in the morning, disaster struck. The vessel began to sink rapidly, tilting into the black water. The cargo tumbled overboard, barrels splashing into the depths. Of the 53 people aboard, 27 were rescued, but 26 went down with the ferry, mostly innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of a secret war. For decades, the hydro ferry and her secret wartime cargo lay hidden in the dark waters of Lake Tinn, a mystery that haunted historians and scientists alike. Had the heavy water really been aboard? Had the barrels been secretly replaced with ordinary water? The answers lay 1,500 feet down, in water too deep and too cold for conventional diving. But now, thanks to advances in underwater technology, we can finally see what happened. Frederick Soreide is a maritime archaeologist who has studied this lake for over 20 years. The dramatic landscape has always fascinated him. The high mountains, the deep water, the sense of secrets lurking beneath the surface. To explore the depths, Frederick works with Thorolf Speer, an expert in remotely operated vehicles. Together, they deploy an ROV equipped with the latest multi-beam sonar technology, allowing them to probe the darkest depths where no human could survive. Multi-beam sonar works by firing sound waves toward the lake floor. When the waves bounce back, sophisticated computers analyze the return signal to display the shape and depth of everything below. The result is a detailed image, almost like a photograph made of sound. Thorolf has been fascinated by the story of the lost ferry for years. He was one of the first to find the wreck, but now he's returned with powerful new scanning equipment and cameras that will give the most detailed record ever made of what lies in the darkness. As the ROV descends through the frigid water, the team watches their monitors intently. The freshwater lake, ice-cold and nearly devoid of oxygen at these depths, acts as a preservative. And then, a ghostly shape looms into view. The superstructure is still standing, recognizable even after all these years. They can see objects scattered across the deck, and then something unmistakable, a railway carriage, but it's upside down, thrown violently from its moorings. The wheels point uselessly toward the surface. The cargo on these carriages was once destined for Nazi Germany. Instead, it lies in the darkness of a Norwegian lake, a testament to one of the war's most daring sabotage operations. But to understand why the ferry is here, in this exact spot, we need to see the entire picture. And now, for the first time, we can. Using multi-beam sonar data combined with cutting-edge computer graphics, we can drain Lake Tinn completely, revealing its astonishing underwater landscape. As the virtual water recedes, the shape of the valley becomes clear. Steep banks descend like walls, plunging 1,500 feet down to the bottom of one of the deepest lakes in Europe. And there, brought back into the light of day for the first time in over 70 years, is the drowned ferry. First, the stern of the 170-foot-long vessel appears, tilting sharply downward. Then the wreckage of the railway carriages, twisted and scattered. The captain's wheelhouse, once the nerve center of the ship, sits askew. The spread of the wreckage tells a story of catastrophic, sudden sinking. The bow has plunged deep into the soft mud of the lake bed. This was not a slow leak or a gradual foundering. This was an explosion. The answer to what wrecked the ferry is one of the most daring sabotage operations of World War II. Norwegian resistance fighters learned about the Nazi heavy water shipment through British intelligence. They received orders from London: stop the shipment at all costs. The stakes couldn't have been higher. These men knew that if the heavy water reached Germany, it could tip the balance of the war in Hitler's favor. They understood that failure was not an option, even if it meant civilian casualties. The night before the ferry was scheduled to depart, under the cover of darkness, the saboteurs moved quietly through the Norwegian night. They boarded the vessel, their hearts pounding, knowing that discovery would mean immediate execution. Working quickly and silently, they placed a time bomb in the ship's hull, set to detonate at a precise moment calculated to sink the ferry in the deepest part of the lake. Then they slipped away, leaving the ship to its fate. The saboteurs knew that some innocent people would die, and they carried that burden for the rest of their lives. The next morning, the ferry departed on schedule. Passengers settled in for what they expected would be a routine crossing. The Nazi guards watched their precious cargo, and deep in the hull, invisible and inexorable, the timer counted down. When the bomb exploded, it tore open the ferry's hull with devastating force. Water poured in, thousands of gallons per second. The ship tilted violently as the stern filled and sank, pulling the rest of the vessel down. Passengers and crew scrambled for the lifeboats, but many never had a chance. In minutes, the hydro slipped beneath the surface, taking 26 souls with it. Draining Lake Tinn reveals that the ferry sank in precisely the spot the saboteurs intended, the deepest part of the lake, where no Nazi diver of that era could ever hope to retrieve the barrels of heavy water. But a crucial question remained unanswered for decades. Was there actually enough heavy water on board to make a difference to Hitler's atomic bomb program? After the war, speculation ran wild. Some suggested that the heavy water had been replaced with ordinary water because the shipment was so lightly guarded. Maybe the entire operation had been unnecessary, a tragic mistake that killed innocent civilians for nothing. The only way to know for sure was to go down and examine the barrels themselves. And so, decades later, a team made the perilous dive to retrieve samples. Testing proved that the barrels did contain heavy water, but that raised another question. How many barrels were there? The scan data provides answers. As we examine the drained lake bed, we can count the barrels visible around the wreck. First, one barrel still on the deck, then two more spilled over the side, then two others 60 feet from the main wreck site. That's 5 barrels visible in the open. Analysis suggests that perhaps 10 barrels floated to the surface because they weren't completely full. 3 of those have been recovered and examined. But what about the rest? Using the scan data as a guide, the survey team calculates that most of the remaining barrels are still inside the ferry, trapped beneath the overturned railway carriages. That accounts for at least 18 barrels total, containing about half a ton of heavy water. That may not sound like much, but it was enough to be a vital missing component for the Nazi nuclear reactor program. After the war, scientists involved in the German nuclear program confirmed what the saboteurs had hoped. The loss of the heavy water was absolutely decisive. It stopped the Nazi reactor program in its tracks. Hitler's dream of an atomic bomb died in the freezing depths of a Norwegian lake, carried down by a ferry full of secrets and sorrow. But Nazi secret weapons weren't confined to Europe. They deployed cutting-edge technology right across the globe, including the Indian Ocean. Draining the waters off the coast of Western Australia reveals 2 shattered wrecks lying in the darkness, separated by just 13 miles of seabed. One appears to be a German merchant ship. The other is HMAS Sydney, the pride of the Australian Navy. The Sydney was a mighty warship, a light cruiser that had already won fame in battle. For Australians, the ship represented their nation's strength and resolve. So when the Sydney disappeared in November 1941 with all 645 men aboard, it became a national trauma. Not knowing the ship's final resting place or the fate of her crew puzzled and haunted Australians for decades. There were no survivors, no distress calls, no wreckage. The ship simply vanished. After the war, a German captain named Theodor Detmers claimed to have defeated the Sydney in battle. He said his ship, the Cormoran, had lured the Australian cruiser close and destroyed it in a brutal firefight. But few Australians trusted this account. The Cormoran was supposedly nothing more than a cargo vessel, and there was no physical evidence of any battle. How could an unarmed merchant ship defeat a powerful warship? The only way to know for sure was to find both vessels. The search area was enormous, covering thousands of square miles of open ocean off the western Australian coast. But the expedition was supported by the Australian government and led by David Mearns, one of the world's top wreck hunters. The vessel geosounder was equipped with new scanning technology, and Mearns used every clue he could find, including the German captain's own account of where his ship went down. The atmosphere was tense. Mearns knew he had to locate not just one ship, but 2. The pressure was immense, the expectations sky high. After 12 days at sea, scanning endless miles of empty ocean floor, the team finally saw something. A shadow on the screen, a shape that could only be a large ship. It was the Cormoran, exactly where the German captain had said it would be. The team erupted in excitement. If the Cormoran was here, could the Sydney be nearby? Just 4 days later, another massive shape appeared on the monitors. It came up suddenly, unmistakably a warship. The team knew immediately that was the Sydney. The elation was overwhelming. After 66 years, the mystery was finally solved. At a depth of about 1.5 miles, the wreck was too deep for divers, so an ROV was sent down to explore. The images that came back were haunting. Twisted metal, guns torn from their mountings, and everywhere, the sense of violent death. But the underwater camera only gave glimpses. To truly understand what happened, we need to see both ships in their entirety. By combining scan data with computer-generated imagery, we can now drain the Indian Ocean and reveal these two lost vessels in the clear light of day. The image is stunning. HMS Sydney, the pride of a nation, lies broken on the seabed, her hull pockmarked by battle damage. This is clear evidence of an epic close-quarters firefight. Using evidence from a seabed and the German captain's account, we can now reconstruct what happened on that fateful day. It was November 19th, 1941, a beautiful day with warm sunshine. As is often the case in the Indian Ocean, visibility was perfect. At 4 in the afternoon, the two ships spotted each other on the horizon, 16 miles apart. The Cormoran signaled that it was an innocent Dutch freighter, but as the Sydney moved in for a closer inspection, the German ship prepared to reveal its deadly secrets. The Cormoran was what's known as a merchant raider, a warship disguised as a harmless cargo vessel. Its mission was to prey on Allied shipping using hit-and-run tactics. The ship was packed with concealed weapons, hidden behind fake panels and camouflage structures. It was like something from a spy movie, but it was all too real. The Nazi captain knew his only chance against a powerful warship was to lure it into close range, where his hidden weapons could be brought to bear before the Sydney realized the danger. According to the rules of war at the time, concealed weapons were perfectly legal as long as the ship revealed its true colors, literally hoisted its national flag, before opening fire. So the Cormoran played its role perfectly, appearing to comply with the Sydney's inspection. Unaware of the true identity of the ship before it, the Sydney moved closer and closer. At about 1,000 meters, well within point-blank range for naval guns, the trap was sprung. The German captain gave the order, decamouflage. The Dutch flag was hauled down. The German war ensign ran up the mast. And in that same instant, hidden panels dropped away to reveal a devastating array of weaponry. The first shots were fired by a repurposed Army anti-tank gun, aimed directly at the Sydney's bridge. The command center of the Australian ship was obliterated in seconds. When we examine the drained wreck of the Sydney, we can see the evidence clearly. The top of the captain's bridge is missing, blown away by that first devastating shot. The command structure of the ship was wiped out in the opening moments of the battle. Then rapid-fire anti-aircraft guns rose up on hydraulic ramps, cutting down the Sydney's exposed crew with withering fire. Despite its innocent appearance, the Cormoran carried very heavy weapons, perfect for close-range combat. At the push of a button, counterweight panels lifted to reveal powerful guns. Their overwhelming firepower knocked out Sydney's forward gun turrets in the first 10 to 15 seconds of action. The drained wreck shows the evidence. The tops of the turrets are blown off, and there's a blast hole in the middle of one of the guns. Caught by surprise and taking catastrophic damage, the Sydney still managed to return fire. Australian gunners, even as their ship was being torn apart around them, scored hits on the Cormoran's engine room, setting it ablaze. But the German ship had one more terrible weapon to deploy. Hidden both above and below the waterline were 6 torpedo tubes, each concealed by steel flaps. The Cormoran's crew could prepare and fire a torpedo in just 32 seconds. The scene was absolute chaos. Guns firing, shells exploding, men dying. It would have been hell on earth for both crews. The Sydney sailors were being wiped out, suffering terrible casualties with no way to effectively fight back. The surprise had been complete, the damage overwhelming. By 6:25 in the evening, confident that the Sydney was fatally wounded and most of its crew already dead, the German captain ceased fire. He claimed victory, boasting that never before in naval history had an armed merchant vessel defeated a cruiser in open battle. Draining the water away from HMAS Sydney reveals the evidence of the final death blow. A 90-foot section of the hull is missing, torn away by the cormoran's torpedoes. The damage caused a massive explosion and catastrophic flooding. The Sydney's entire bow section broke off, and the ship plunged 1.5 miles down, taking all 645 men with it. The most serious loss in Australian naval history was complete. But it raises a question. If the Sydney was defeated, why is the German raider also at the bottom of the Indian Ocean? The answer lies in the damage the Sydney inflicted before it died. The Cormoran sailed away from the battle victorious, but it had been mortally wounded. With the engines broken down, a huge fire raging on board, and a cargo of highly explosive mines in the hold, the German commander had no choice but to abandon ship. The crew took to lifeboats, and many were later rescued. But to prevent the ship's many secrets from being discovered, Hitler had similar merchant raiders operating around the world. The crew then detonated charges and blew up their own vessel. Today, the scan data reveals a massive debris field near the Cormoran's wreck, evidence of that final explosion. The two ships still lie just 13 miles apart on the seabed, locked together in death as they were in battle. They serve as war graves, protected sites where the dead of both nations rest together beneath the waves. The world's oceans hide Nazi secrets in the most unexpected places. The Baltic Sea, that cold body of water trapped between Northern Europe and Scandinavia, holds one of the most surprising finds of all, a forgotten German aircraft carrier that never saw battle. When we drain the icy waters here, we reveal the Graf Zeppelin, Hitler's only attempt at building a fleet carrier. The Graf Zeppelin disappeared more than 70 years ago, and its ultimate fate remained a mystery until an oil survey vessel began scanning the Baltic seabed. The team was using multi-beam sonar when they came across something that grabbed their attention immediately. After processing the measurements, they realized they'd found something about 260 meters long, over 800 feet. It was the largest wreck ever discovered in the Baltic Sea. The excitement was palpable. This was a truly spectacular find. Now, divers and historians are investigating this monster of the deep. And nearly 290 feet down, the darkness is almost total. Divers can only catch glimpses of the lost giant. Timber decking from the flight deck, massive anchor chains, and the sense of enormous size lurking in the gloom. The question that haunts investigators is simple. If this vessel was so large and potentially so powerful, why did it never play a full part in the war? The answer takes us back to December 1938 to the shipyards of Kiel, Germany. Hitler loved launching large warships. He saw them as great national symbols, testaments to German power and technological prowess. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, served as master of ceremonies for the launch of the Graf Zeppelin. The Nazis had huge ambitions for the vessel. More than 40 fighters, bombers, and torpedo aircraft would make it a mighty war machine. Elevators would carry aircraft from the hangar deck up to the flight deck, and planes would launch by catapult. The thought of Stuka dive bombers taking off from an aircraft carrier was terrifying to Allied planners. These aircraft, carrying out torpedo and dive bombing attacks on Allied ships far from land, would have greatly strengthened the German naval position. Winston Churchill saw the Nazi aircraft carrier as a priority target. The British were very concerned that the Germans would complete the Graf Zeppelin, recognizing it as a significant threat. But the Nazis were frustratingly slow to finish this vast warship. Though the ship was launched and seaworthy, final work was delayed time and time again. The problem was resources. Contrary to appearances, Germany was desperately short of steel and other construction materials. Every ton of steel used for the aircraft carrier was a ton that couldn't be used for tanks, submarines, or other weapons. Because German planners initially thought the war would be short, they concluded that the Graf Zeppelin might not be completed in time to make a difference. So they stopped building large warships and focused on weapons that could be deployed more quickly. By February 1945, the Nazis faced inevitable defeat. Soviet forces were closing in from the east, and Admiral Donitz issued a scorched earth policy: destroy key assets to prevent them from falling into Russian hands. One of those assets was the Graf Zeppelin. A German wrecking crew scuttled the massive ship, sending it to the bottom, never having seen battle. But that wasn't the end of the story. The aircraft carrier was abandoned in the River Oder, but now it rests 200 miles away in the middle of the Baltic Sea. How did it get there? After the war, the Russians seized the vast vessel as war booty. Soviet engineers raised the ship by sealing the holes, pumping out the water, and floating it. Then they decided to use the Graf Zeppelin for a unique Cold War experiment. Historians and naval experts visit archives to investigate, searching for clues to explain the ship's final moments. They find photographs showing extensive damage from various military ordnance, with notably less damage on one side than the other. Polish Navy teams positively identified the wreck and used mapping technology to scan it in detail. The enormity of the vessel is surprising even to experienced divers. It's hard to imagine the scale unless you've seen it in person. By using detailed sonar scans, we can now drain the Baltic Sea and reveal evidence of the Graf Zeppelin's final moments. The 850-foot-long drowned Leviathan appears, clearly showing extensive damage caused by explosives. There's a large 100-foot hole in the deck that looks like the result of intensive bombing. This hole wasn't there when the Germans abandoned the ship, so what caused it? In August 1947, the Russians decided to conduct a test. They wanted to see how much punishment the Graf Zeppelin could take before it sank. The Soviets planted a series of massive bombs inside the wreck. 2,000-kilo bombs detonated on the flight deck. Then they sent in waves of aircraft to attack the ship with additional bombs. Of over 90 bombs dropped, only 5 or 6 actually hit the target. It was a revealing experiment. The Soviets had no aircraft carrier of their own at the time, and they knew their potential new enemies, the British and Americans, did. By bombing the Graf Zeppelin, they learned valuable lessons about how to sink aircraft carriers and, more importantly, how difficult it was to do so. The experiments showed that carriers were not as vulnerable as Soviet planners might have hoped. They were remarkably resilient to attack, able to absorb tremendous punishment before sinking. It was a lesson that would influence Soviet naval strategy for decades to come. Nazi secret technology reached around the world, and draining the oceans reveals evidence of it in the most surprising places. The English Channel, that narrow strip of water separating Britain from continental Europe, is the grave of a remarkable vessel equipped with technology that could have changed the course of the war. When we drain these waters, we reveal the mystery of the Nazi U-boat U-480. This killer submarine, equipped with stealth technology that made it effectively invisible, vanished in 1945. By August 1944, the situation for German U-boats in the English Channel was grim. The D-Day landings had succeeded, and Allied forces were pushing into France. The Channel had become one of the best defended areas around the British Isles, bristling with destroyers, patrol boats, and aircraft. The Allies had developed highly effective methods for hunting submarines, and the most devastating of these was sonar. Earlier in the war, Nazi U-boats had savaged Allied shipping in the Battle of the Atlantic, largely by hunting in wolf packs on the surface where sonar was of limited use. But by 1944, heavy surface patrols forced U-boats to operate completely underwater, making them much more vulnerable. Operations in a submarine in the English Channel at that time were extremely dangerous. If you were the commander of a U-boat, your chances of survival were about 50-50. This wasn't wolf-pack warfare against convoys. It was individual submarines stalking individual ships, a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Nazis wanted desperately to counter the threat of sonar, and German answer was to develop a kind of cloak of invisibility. By August 21st, 1944, Hitler's designers achieved their dream. U-boat Captain Hans Joachim Forster and his crew lay in wait deep in the English Channel, and the Allies never realized they were there. In just 5 days, Forster sank 4 ships and escaped. It was the most devastating patrol carried out in the Channel up to that time, a remarkable achievement given the heavy Allied presence. What was the secret? Underwater archaeologist Innes McCartney investigates reports of a U-boat wreck about 20 miles off the coast of southern England, hidden 200 feet down. The sense of anticipation is incredible as divers descend through the murky water. Their first interaction with this completely unseen object is trying to work out what it is, running their hands over the hull in the darkness. Now, for the first time, we can drain the waters of the English Channel and bring you 480 into the clear light of day. The secret of the stealth submarine is immediately visible. The entire surface of a U-boat is covered with rubber panels. Each panel has a series of tiny regular holes. Instead of reflecting sonar signals back to Allied warships, these rubber panels absorb them, scattering and dissipating the sound energy. The submarine becomes effectively invisible to sonar, a ghost in the water. When divers first touched these black rubber panels, the realization was stunning. This was technology decades ahead of its time. Diminishing the effectiveness of enemy sonar could make the difference between life and death for a submarine crew. The technology worked remarkably well, as Captain Forster's successful patrol demonstrated. But draining U-480 raises another critical question. If this vessel was undetectable, why is it at the bottom of the English Channel? Removing the water reveals the damage. The submarine has sustained a critical blow. The stern section is broken off, and there's a hole in the pressure hull that would have flooded the boat in seconds. What caused such devastating damage? Faced with a modern high-tech threat, the Allies resorted to a very old-fashioned response: mines. In February 1945, shipping lanes crisscrossed the channel, but Allied vessels were secretly warned not to travel in specific areas. Unknown to German U-boat crews, the British were laying what's called a deep trap minefield far below the surface, then simply waiting. When U-480 returned to what had been its old hunting grounds, expecting to find more targets, the captain saw that the navigational buoys were still there, indicating the route was still being used. In fact, it wasn't. The British had laid their trap perfectly. The minefield was positioned at the exact depth and location where intelligence suggested U-480 would travel. This was targeted killing based on signals intelligence and code breaking. The reason for keeping the minefield secret was strategic. You don't want the enemy to know you've broken their codes or that you know their patrol patterns. For the crew of U-480 traveling through the dark water, there was no warning, no chance to evade. They were blind. And then 320 pounds of explosive detonated against the hull, bursting a hole that let in tons of water per second. There was no chance of escape. The entire crew, 49 men, died instantly or drowned in the freezing darkness. The secret stealth technology was years ahead of its time, a glimpse of the future of naval warfare. Modern submarines still use variations of this rubber coating to reduce their sonar signature. But in the end, even U-480's special cloak of invisibility could not save it from the victorious Allies. Intelligence, patience, and a well-laid trap proved more effective than cutting-edge technology. The Nazis lost World War II. History records their defeat and the end of their murderous regime. But the deadly secrets they left behind under the world's oceans remain as reminders of that conflict. They are monuments not to Nazi achievements, but to the extraordinary courage of the men and women who brought them down. The Norwegian resistance fighters who destroyed the heavy water, knowing innocent civilians would die. The crew of HMAS Sydney, who fought to the last man against overwhelming surprise attack. The Allied sailors and airmen who hunted U-boats in freezing, dangerous waters. The Soviet soldiers who captured the Graf Zeppelin and used it to prepare for future conflicts. These wrecks are more than historical curiosities. They are war graves, protected sites where the dead rest. The 645 men of HMAS Sydney, the 26 civilians aboard the hydro ferry, the 49 crew of U-480. They lie in darkness, in crushing pressure, in water so cold that time itself seems suspended. And as we use technology to reveal these secrets, to drain the oceans, and see what has been hidden for so long, we must remember that we are looking at more than metal and machinery. We are looking at the final resting places of those who served, who fought and who died in the most destructive war in human history. Their stories, brought to light after decades in darkness, remind us of the cost of conflict and the courage required to resist tyranny. They are Hitler's darkest secrets, yes, but they are also testaments to those who ensured his secrets would never be enough to secure victory.